The Florida housing market just flipped, and also the data I'm going to share in today's video is definitely going to surprise you, especially if you're watching YouTube videos, for example. Just looking at Florida housing market on YouTube, the Florida housing market is crashing, but there's some good news. Governor Penix, the real estate market is crashing. The Florida market cools as listings surge, they collapse. Major Florida housing markets hit the brakes and the Florida housing bubble has burst. The boom is over. I'm going to share actual data about what's happening right now in Florida. And also, more importantly, how does this all compare to years past, going back to pre-COVID levels? Thank you everyone for joining me in today's video. I appreciate you. Please like and subscribe. And let's begin today's video regarding the latest trends we're seeing right now in the state of Florida. All right, so the data I'm sharing in today's video regarding home prices, housing inventory, sales, and much, much more is from the Florida Realtors Association. Of course, I'm going to provide my own analysis of what's happening right now. So let's first talk about closed home sales for July. And this is only for single family houses only. So it excludes condos and multifamily units. So closed home sales for July compared to July of 2024 decreased by 2.8%. So sales have been down year over year for 9 out of the past 12 months and remains below pre-COVID levels. We should be seeing around 25,000 closed home sales for July. Now we're at just under 23,000. Therefore, sales remain at very low levels. However, this 2.8% decrease, though, is much better than the 23% huge decrease that occurred in July of 2022, when, of course, inventory skyrocketed because mortgage rates went from 3 to about 7%. So the decline of 23% in July 22 compared to 21 is obviously much worse than the 2.8% decrease we're seeing right now. So therefore, closed home sales are no longer crashing. I would say they are maintaining at very low levels, but they're no longer experiencing this huge decline like we saw in 2022. All right, let's talk about cash sales in the state of Florida for July. That was at 26%, which means that 26% of all closed home sales in July came from a cash buyer. They paid all cash for a house. So 1 every 4 houses that closed came from a cash buyer. That is a slight decrease compared to 1 year ago. This is slightly lower than the past several years, but it is on par with what we saw back in July 2017 through 2019. All right, let's change gears and talk about prices. This is the overall for the state, right? So every market's different. I should have mentioned this earlier on. At the end of this video, I'm going to share how each of the major metros compares, because there's some very big differences. So every market's different. Real estate's local, right? So let's talk about the state as a whole, though. Their median sale price. This means that out of all the houses that did sell for these particular months, half sold above that amount and half sold below that amount. That's the median number. That was at $410,000 this July, a 1.7% decrease compared to 1 year earlier. This also marks the 5th consecutive month in which prices are down year over year. But the 1.7% decrease, though, is actually the smallest decline since March this year, which is right here. March, it decreased by 1.9%. In February, it was flat. So this is actually the smallest decrease over the past several months. So here's my take on this. Home prices are no longer crashing. Instead, they have been relatively flat for the past year. And really, to be honest, prices have been relatively flat for about 3 years in Florida. Over the past 1 year, it has been in the range of $410,000 to $415,000, and now we're at $410,000. So buyers, a small decrease, this is for buyers, this small decrease in prices and mortgage rates is a step in the right direction for an improvement of housing affordability. Perhaps, though, the sharp increase in home insurance rates, though, kind of counterbalances that. So we're seeing improvements in rates and prices, but the counterbalance that is a sharp rise in home insurance rates over the past several years. All right, before we share some other trends regarding pending sales and inventory numbers, there's some really big changes and some things that you guys should definitely be aware of here. I want to talk about this. This is the median percent of original list price received. Let me just explain this. So for July, that was at 95.1%. This means homes on average that month sold for 5% below the seller's original list price. That's a slight decrease compared to a year ago, when on average, homes were selling about 4% less than asking. If I were to share numbers back in July of 2021, though, that ratio was at 100%. So homes on average were selling for the seller's asking price. Now they're clearly selling far below that, which is an indication, of course, the market has slowed down greatly due to a variety of factors, namely housing supply. All right, let's also talk about days in the market. This is a time frame when a homeowner, they list their home for sale and then they accept an offer from a home buyer. That's days in the market. For July, that was at 48 days. 1 year ago, it was 37 days. So therefore, it took about 11 days longer to sell a home compared to a year ago. Therefore, homes are taking longer to sell, and they're selling on average for less than the seller's asking price, which of course is helping reduce the overall median sale price. Let's also share the number of new pending home sales. This is the number of listed properties, homes that are listed for sale, that went under contract with a buyer during these months. So in July, there was just over 23,000 new pending home sales, a slight decrease from 1 year ago. Now, this is a really important note here because this report here only goes back to the past 12 months, but actually looked back at their previous reports going back to January of 2017. So for example, new pending home sales are down slightly from last year, but this is also the fewest number of new pendings for the month of July since at least July of 2017. This implies that closed home sales will remain at very low levels in August once they publish those in about 1 month from now. In other words, if an offer gets accepted in July, more often than not becomes a closed home sale in August, as long as the buyer doesn't back out. Again, in my personal opinion, based on the data we have today, sales are no longer crashing because 23,000 is only slightly below the past couple of years, again, only down by 0.7%. And for comparison, pendings were down a whopping 19% in July of 2022, which was our last major correction in our housing market in Florida and frankly across the United States as well. So pending sales are down only about 0.7%, whereas in July 22, they're down a whopping 19%. Here's something that really actually may surprise you as well. And this is one of the reasons why actually inventory has already peaked this year. In other words, inventory is actually going down, which is highly unusual during this time of year. And if you guys want to see a housing market crash, inventory has to be absolutely skyrocketing, right? A big imbalance between supply and demand. So I'll talk about that regarding inventory here in a little bit. I think it's next, but let's talk about new listings. This is a number of houses in which homeowners listed their homes for sale. That's a new listing. So for July, it was at 29,510, a decrease down by 2.8%. This actually marks the third consecutive month in which new listings decreased compared to the previous year. Far different compared to last year, where we saw a gain up by nearly 11% from July of 2023. So therefore, the number of properties listed for sale has been down year over year for the past 3 months. If they were skyrocketing, like I mentioned, we would see inventory absolutely skyrocketing, which of course would put huge downward pressure on home prices. And in fact, right now, we're kind of seeing the opposite because new listings have actually been going down for the past few months. Also, interesting enough, around 30,000 new listings for July is normal during this time of year, looking at pre-COVID levels. And we're right around that at just under 30,000. So my take on this is that Florida's median sale price, we're talking about home prices, has been flat for about 3 years. In other words, if you bought a home in Florida on average over the past 3 years, going back to July of 2022, you probably won't see a whole lot of appreciation or depreciation in your home, just talking about, statewide averages. So therefore, perhaps homeowners are opting not to list their houses for sale because they have been seeing this huge increase in prices. Let's just give you an example. Let's just say you bought a home in Florida 3 years ago for $400,000 And the current market value today in July of 25 is also $400,000. Therefore, your home value is flat compared to 3 years ago. However, though, if you were to sell your home for, let's just say $400,000, your purchase price from 3 years ago, you actually would be losing money because of closing costs in selling a home. You have to pay for real estate agent fees and also closing costs in order to just sell a house in Florida or anywhere across the United States. So therefore, if you sell your house for the exact same price you purchased it for, you're going to be in the red. It doesn't mean your mortgage is going to be under the red unless you bought a home for 0% down, such as a VA loan, for example. But if you bought a home over the past 3 years, you probably won't see a whole lot of appreciation, and therefore, this is maybe one of the reasons why we're seeing a decrease of new listings, because people want to sell and actually recoup their money at the very least. Also, it's worth noting that this decline we have been seeing for the past several months is actually down compared to what we saw a year ago. So back in July, new listings rose by nearly 11%. This does not mean that everything is rosy and everything's fine though, because this is pretty unusual here. So looking at this, there's nearly 113,000 homes for sale. Those are single family homes in Florida. That's up by 20.5%. This is also slightly lower than the peak that occurred in May of 2025 when there was 117,000. I believe that was a 9-year high in active listings in Florida. So therefore, we're still up by double digits from last year, but the gain of 20% year over year is the smallest gain since December of 2023. I had to go back looking at the other reports because over the past 12 months, we've been seeing gains in the range of 25% to 50%. Last year, we're up by 53% year over year. Now we're half that at a gain of 20%. Therefore, my take on this is that inventory is no longer surging. In fact, inventory peaked early this year. Actually, inventory peaked in May, which I actually looked at reports going back to January of 2017. Inventory in Florida tends to peak during the winter months. And here we are, we peaked already in May. But again, even though inventory has actually been going down for the past few months, inventory hit a 9-year high in May this year. And again, we're not too far below that at 113,000 versus 117,000 in May. Therefore, because inventory is still at very elevated levels, let me actually just share this with you guys. This is going back to January of 21. I mean, looking at this, the peak right here, we're only down slightly compared to the 9-year high we had just a few months ago. So this should put continued pressure downward on home prices in the state. What's also crazy about this, we have 112,000 homes for sale. Look at February of 2022. There was around 25,000, and now there's basically 4 times that right now. Let's also have a look at the month supply in Florida. It's at 5.4 months. This implies, this is my opinion, that it is a buyer's market in which buyers have an advantage over home sellers. 5.4 months, a gain of 23% year over year. However, like I mentioned though, this is down slightly compared to the past several months. 5.4 months is the lowest supply since February of 2025. Back then, the month supply was at 5.3 months. For comparison's sake, the month supply was around 4 months back in July 17 and 18. So now we're at elevated levels at 5.4 months. However, in contrast, the month supply was extremely low when we had less than 3% mortgage rates for a 30-year fix on average. Back then in July 21, the month supply was only 1.1 months. A very strong seller's market in which sellers had a clear advantage over home buyers. And now, in my opinion, buyers have an advantage over home sellers at 5.4 months. Having said that, just like house inventory, the gains are actually losing momentum because now we're up by 23%. 1 year ago, we were up a staggering 57%. I also found this to be really interesting as well. This is the number of closed home sales by price tier. So this is really interesting here because we're seeing a decrease of more expensive properties that sold compared to 1 year ago. So let me just break this down for you guys. In the range of 400,000 to just under 600,000, these are closed home sales. That decreased by 6.2% from 1 year ago. Also a decline in the $600 to $1 million range and over $1 million as well. In contrast, we're seeing increases in the more affordable price tiers, right? So for example, in the range of 50,000 to 300,000, we saw an increase. Therefore, sales are down in the more expensive range, but they're up in the more affordable range. This mix in sales could be helping decrease the overall state's median sale price because of the mix in sales. In other words, because sales have been increasing at the lower end of the market and have been decreasing at the upper range, this could be helping cause the state's median price to actually decrease. So that was a look at closed home sales by price tier. Let's have a look at new supply hitting the market by price tier as well, which we're seeing kind of like the similar scenario. A decrease in the more expensive range for over $400,000. In contrast, we actually saw a huge increase, maybe not huge, but up by 5.5% in the range of 250 to 300,000, and a huge increase in the range of 150 to 200,000. So we're seeing a decline of closed home sales and new listings at the upper range of the market, and just the opposite in the lower, more affordable range. I also want to provide you guys an update regarding foreclosures, because I'm sure a lot of you have seen videos about how foreclosures are absolutely skyrocketing in Florida. I actually want to share the data though, at least from the Florida Realtors. So there was 22,508 traditional home sales in July. This means it was just a regular sale, not a distressed home sale, such as a foreclosure or a short sale. There was only 152 foreclosures and only 47 short sales. This means that distressed home sales remain virtually non-existent in Florida at less than 1% of all closed home sales this July. And again, be careful of what you read, especially regarding headlines in the news or on YouTube videos, for example, because another way that I could have made this video is saying that short sales absolutely skyrocketed. They rose by 11.9% from year over year, and the housing market in Florida is absolutely crashing. I also could say that short sales increased by 5 compared to 1 year ago, going from 42 short sales to 47 this July. So the reality is that even though short sales rose by 12%, in reality, we only saw 5 more short sales from a year ago. I mean, let's be real, guys, okay? All right, let's go over what we're seeing at the metro level in Florida. I'm only looking at major metros in Florida, and I'm defining that as at least 1,000 closed home sales in July. So for example, in Cape Coral, Florida, that's Fort Myers MSA. MSA stands for Metro Stat Area. Sales decreased by 2.4%, and their median sold price fell by 5.1%. Here's a statewide average again. Sales fell by 2.8%, and prices declined by 1.7%. I actually looked at the major metros here. All major metros in Florida had a decrease in prices, and only one metro saw a gain in sales from 12 months ago. In Jacksonville metro area, sales fell by 2% and prices down by 2.3%. Lakeland, Winter Haven, Florida, sales decreased by 5.6%, prices down by 3%. Miami, prices only down by 0.6%, but a fairly strong decline in sales there, down by 6.4% compared to 2.8% for the state as a whole. Northport, Sarasota is the only major metro that had a gain in sales, up by 1.4%. But again, prices are still down there. Orlando down by 1.2%, but prices are down by only 0.9%. And lastly, the Tampa, St. Petersburg area, Sales decreased by 3.3 and their median sale price down by 2.6%. I want you guys to comment below because I'm just making videos based on data. And I want to hear what you guys are personally seeing in Florida. If you're an agent, a loan officer there, or if you just live there, or if you're just watching the market, what are you seeing in the market there? Are you seeing a lot of houses being listed for sale? They get delisted, huge price reductions? Let me know. This all will help me and also everyone who's watching today's video as well. If you guys are looking for a realtor, whether you're looking to buy or sell a home in Florida, then please check out my website, which is realestateteamfinder.com. With that said, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Have an amazing day. I appreciate you guys so much.